Mom looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You've got 1 month to find a new place. We sold the house. You're out." I never thought my own mother would kick me out of the only home I've ever known. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Alara. I'm 23, fresh out of college, juggling bills and applications, doing everything I can to find my footing. I've been working shifts wherever I could pick them up, pulling long hours just to cover groceries and student loan payments. For years, the only reassurance I had came from my mom's word. I could stay in the house until I found enough stability to move on my own. That promise was the only thing keeping me sane during the late nights when I thought I'd never dig out from under debt. So when she stood there, voice sharp and final, telling me to pack up, I couldn't even process the words at first. My chest felt hollow, my ears ringing like I had stepped into another world. This was the place I celebrated birthdays, studied for exams, cried after heartbreaks. It wasn't just walls and furniture, it was my anchor. And now, in a single breath, it was being pulled from me. I stared at her, searching for even a trace of hesitation, some softness that meant she didn't really mean it. But her expression stayed flat, unyielding, like I was nothing more than a tenant overstaying my lease. It wasn't just the shock of losing a roof. It was the sting of betrayal, the realization that the ground I thought was steady had vanished beneath my feet. I had no plan, no safety net, no savings tucked away. All I had was the belief that I had time. That belief was gone, and with it, the trust one thought could never break. Vivian stood with Carl beside her, both of them speaking as if the decision was practical, harmless. They insisted it was about change, about turning the page and starting new. Words like fresh start rolled off their tongues as though they had rehearsed it, as though they had convinced themselves this was something noble. Alara listened, her stomach tightening with every sentence. She wanted to believe there had been no other choice, that maybe debts or emergencies had forced their hand. But that illusion shattered quickly. A passing comment from Carl let the truth slip. There was no hardship, no looming crisis. They hadn't been struggling at all. They had taken the equity from the only place Alara had known and funneled it into something shiny, something they believed would elevate them. A high-rise condo, glossy brochures still sitting on the kitchen counter, made it clear what they had chosen over her. The realization hit like a slap. They weren't protecting the family, they weren't downsizing for survival. They had traded roots for vanity. What hurt most wasn't just the move itself, it was the secrecy. Not once had Vivian sat down with her to explain, to even give her a chance to prepare. No warning, no conversation, only the blunt announcement after papers were already signed. Alara felt a crack inside, a break between the mother she thought she had and the woman standing before her now. Betrayal burned hotter than fear of the unknown. To them, it was just property, just numbers on a check. To her, it was trust. And that trust had been sold along with the house. Alara couldn't hold back any longer. She cornered Vivian in the living room, her voice trembling but firm, asking for more time. Rent had become impossible, and every listing she searched felt like a wall closing in. She pleaded for even a few months of breathing room, a little space to get her finances together. Vivian didn't soften. She didn't hesitate. Her reply came clipped like a knife cutting through the air. "We've supported you long enough. You're an adult. Sink or swim." The words landed heavier than any slammed door, shutting down every ounce of hope Alara had clung to. Her chest tightened as memories rushed back. Nights spent counting tips from a part-time shift, handing over wrinkled cash to cover utilities when Carl had no income. She remembered balancing textbooks with exhaustion, dragging herself home past midnight just to keep the lights on for everyone else. She had carried weight no teenager should have to carry, always told it was temporary, always promised her sacrifices would be remembered. Yet here she was, staring at the very people who had benefited from her effort, dismissed as if her years of contribution meant nothing. Vivian's face stayed blank, Carl looking away like it wasn't his concern. Gratitude had been replaced by indifference, love by calculation. Alara stood there, the truth sinking in. Family wasn't shielding her, they were discarding her. Alara packed what she could into a few bags and started drifting from one couch to another. Each morning she woke up in a different living room, quietly folding blankets before heading out to hunt for something she could call her own. The constant shuffling left her drained, her body heavy with exhaustion, her mind restless from the instability. She filled out application after application, sitting in coffee shops with her laptop open, refreshing job boards until her eyes blurred. Some interviews came, but offers were scarce, and the paychecks dangled in front of her weren't nearly enough to cover the steep rents listed online. Every time she calculated numbers, the gap between income and expenses grew wider, pressing down like a weight she couldn't shake. One evening, after another polite rejection email, she found herself sitting alone in a borrowed room, staring at the ceiling. Tears came hard, unstoppable, soaking into the pillow. It wasn't just the struggle of money or the uncertainty of where she'd sleep next week. It was the hollow ache of knowing her own mother had turned her back at the exact moment she needed comfort. The person who should have been her safety had become the one who cut the ground from under her feet. As the sobs slowed, a different feeling began to stir beneath the grief. A quiet heat, steady and sharp, formed deep inside. She couldn't erase the betrayal, but she could decide what to do with it. And in that silence, she knew, this wound would not just fester. It would fuel her. Something inside whispered that she wouldn't remain powerless forever. Alara stopped by to collect a few things she had left behind when she caught voices drifting from the patio. She froze, hearing Carl's tone, smug and animated as he spoke to a neighbor. His laughter carried through the air, full of pride rather than struggle. We played it smart, dumped the old place, bought cheap, flipped it, and now we've got cash rolling in. The words hit harder than any insult. Alara pressed her back against the wall, listening in disbelief. So this wasn't about survival, not about scraping by or cutting losses. It was a calculated move, a deal that padded their pockets while leaving her scrambling. She thought back to the endless weekends she had spent mowing lawns, patching paint, fixing things when money was tight. All those hours she gave without complaint had helped keep that property standing, had preserved its value. And now Carl was standing there, gloating, treating it like a clever game they had won. Her stomach twisted as the truth settled in. They hadn't just sold the only place she'd known. They had made a profit off it, a profit built partly on her own sweat and sacrifice. It wasn't just displacement anymore. It was exploitation, dressed up as strategy. In that moment, something hardened inside her. The betrayal she already felt deepened into a wound that could never be excused. They hadn't just abandoned her. They had cashed in on everything she had poured into that home, and they were celebrating while she was left with nothing. Alara sat at a borrowed desk with her laptop open, determination replacing the helplessness that once consumed her. She began gathering every scrap of evidence she could find. Old messages tucked away in her phone showed requests from Vivian asking for money, just until next paycheck. Bank statements revealed small transfers she had made over the years, chipped away from her meager earnings. Even receipts, saved out of habit, painted a picture of someone who had quietly supported the household far more than anyone cared to admit. The more she pieced together, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't a child leeching off her parents, as Vivian liked to suggest. It was the opposite. Alara had been keeping them afloat during their rough patches. And now, those same people had discarded her like she was nothing. While digging through old files, she uncovered something worse, something that stole her breath. Her grandmother had left money intended for her schooling, a small cushion to give her the chance at a brighter path. Alara had always believed those funds were tied up, inaccessible until later. But records told a different story. Vivian had withdrawn large portions years ago, funneling the inheritance into Carl's mounting obligations. Her chest tightened, fury rising like a tide she could no longer hold back. That gift from her grandmother, her one safeguard for a future, had been swallowed by someone else's mistakes. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft of the life she should have had. As she closed the folders and stacked the proof neatly, one thought burned in her mind. They had taken everything from her. Now she would take something back. Alara walked into the kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm, her heartbeat sharp against her ribs. Vivian sat at the table, sipping tea as if nothing in the world was wrong. Without a word, Alara laid the papers down, page after page of records she had collected. Transfers, messages, documents. Every piece of evidence lined up in black and white. Vivian's expression faltered for a moment before hardening again. She leaned back, arms crossed, voice dripping with rehearsed calm. "Family sacrifices for each other," she said, as though that single phrase erased years of deception. Alara's hands shook, but her voice did not. She locked eyes with the woman who had raised her and answered, steady and cold. "I sacrificed. You exploited." The silence afterward felt heavier than any shouting match could. Carl shuffled nearby, avoiding her gaze, while Vivian bristled, refusing to admit fault. But Alara no longer needed their validation. She had the truth, and it was enough. She gathered the folder back into her hands, her jaw tight. "You think I'm powerless," she said, her tone low but sharp as glass. "You think I'll just walk away and forget. But I promise you, this isn't over. You'll regret underestimating me." Then she turned, leaving them with their silence, their tea gone cold, and the weight of a storm they never expected to face. Alara sat across from a polished desk, clutching a slim envelope of cash that represented nearly everything she had scraped together. Her voice wavered at first as she explained what she had uncovered, sliding the documents forward. The attorney flipped through each page carefully, eyes narrowing, then finally looked up with certainty. There was ground to stand on. What Vivian had done with the inheritance wasn't just immoral. It crossed a line in the law. The assurance struck like a spark in the dark. For the first time in months, Alara felt a sliver of control return. The lawyer outlined the steps they could take, the process ahead, and while daunting, it was real. She wasn't powerless anymore. Outside that office, her fight became twofold. By day, she threw herself into work, early mornings at a diner, late nights stocking shelves at a store. The pay was meager, but she refused to rely on anyone else again. Every tip slipped into an envelope, every paycheck deposited with care, marked the slow climb toward stability. By night, she kept in touch with her attorney, sending over additional proof whenever she unearthed another piece of the past. The grind was relentless, her body aching from exhaustion, but beneath the fatigue burned determination. Each shift finished, each dollar saved, was a step closer to breaking free from the shadow of betrayal. She no longer measured her worth by the approval of the people who had discarded her. She measured it in progress, in the quiet confidence that soon, very soon, the scales would begin to tip in her favor. The courtroom felt colder than Alara expected, its silence broken only by the shuffle of papers and the measured voices of attorneys. She sat tall, every document neatly prepared, every detail ready to be laid bare. When her lawyer presented the evidence, there was no denying it. Withdrawals traced back directly to Vivian, money earmarked for Alara's education funneled into debts that were never hers to carry. Vivian shifted in her seat, her expression a mix of defiance and unease, while Carl avoided her gaze entirely. For years they had painted themselves as victims of circumstance, but here the numbers spoke louder than excuses. Each record highlighted how deliberate their actions had been. The judge listened, reviewed, and finally delivered a ruling that cut through the room. Vivian and Carl were ordered to repay a substantial portion of the funds, a figure so heavy it bent their carefully built lifestyle. Their polished confidence faltered in an instant, the weight of accountability finally pressing down on them. Not long after, word spread that the payments on their gleaming condo had fallen behind. The very symbol of their triumph, the place they had chosen over loyalty, was stripped from them. Notices arrived, locks were changed, and their grand fresh start crumbled piece by piece. Alara walked out of the courthouse that day with no illusions. Justice hadn't erased the scars, but it had leveled the ground. For once, they were the ones left scrambling, while she, at last, stood on solid footing. Boxes lined the floor of a modest one-bedroom, sunlight spilling across freshly painted walls. Alara set the last one down with a quiet sigh, not from weariness but from relief. The keys in her pocket weren't borrowed, they weren't conditional, they were hers. Rent was covered by the funds she had rightfully won back, and for the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her belonged to her alone. The apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was warm. A thrifted couch, secondhand dishes, and a small desk in the corner made up her new world. Every piece carried the weight of her own effort rather than someone else's decisions. Each detail whispered independence, reminding her she had built this life step by step, without the shadow of manipulation hanging overhead. Vivian and Carl's numbers were blocked, their faces relegated to the past. No more tense phone calls, no more guilt-laced lectures. Cutting the cord was painful, but it also brought clarity. She realized she didn't need their approval, nor their presence, to define who she was. Late one evening, sitting by the window with the city lights stretching out before her, Alara let herself reflect. What she had lost in blood ties she had gained in peace. What once felt like abandonment had become an unshakable lesson in strength. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just justice, it's living a life they can't ruin anymore. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you know exactly how sweet that victory feels. Hey besties, Thanks for sticking with me till the end. Alara's journey showed how betrayal can cut deep, but also how strength and justice can rise from it. From being kicked out to winning back her freedom, she proved that sometimes the sweetest revenge is building a life no one can take away. If this touched you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.